I'm an hour and a half out of Berlin. That's where I live. And I was in Berlin for some band sessions, and I was trying to get home, but that was an issue because the trains weren't running.
You're in Germany, though.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so, providing the train went to the right place.
You're home. You're just not entirely sure that it's the right country.
No, I'm a little bit at the moment. It's so confusing. It's been, I was shooting a video a day ago or something. I went straight, and we were shooting in the middle of the night in the woods. And I kind of went straight from that to Berlin. So I've been sort of, it's as if the video just continued for the last day, and it's very confusing.
I feel like in a normal year, the question of where you are would be even more difficult to answer. But has the pandemic made you a little more stationary, I guess is probably the right word?
In some ways, yeah, but during the pandemic, I was pretty much just in the countryside recording and working on stuff. But now that the album's being released, I go backwards and forwards between Berlin and here. And that's actually kind of somehow a logistical nightmare because it's not that close. So I have to keep going backs and forwards, and because my band is based in Berlin, and a lot of things that I'm doing. So actually, at the moment, it's a lot of here and here, but not to be compared to touring the world for sure.
Touring the world and it sounded like you were jumping back and forth between Germany and Mexico for a little while there as well.
Oh, definitely, yeah. That's been really strange, actually. This winter and the one before were I think the first time I spent the winter in Berlin for years, and that was a bit of a shock. Normally I go to Mexico or anywhere but here, because it's a bit too hardcore. It gets very cold and windy and dark. There's like no sun. So this year was an endurance test in many ways. But sometimes it brings you to places that you wouldn't have got to out of choice. So in hindsight, I'm thankful for that.
I assume that when you say places in this context, you're speaking a little bit more metaphorically.
Oh, yeah.
What places has the last year brought you?
Well, I finished the album finally, which is good. And there was no escape. There was like no way to procrastinate because there was just no escape. And it also made things extremely intense, just generally, my life. I think Corona was somehow a side note compared to the other stuff that was going down, because it was just an extremely just crazy year, So that's where the music came from more than anything. It was just extremely emotional, and music was somehow the only sanity railing that I could hold on to along the way and sort of go along with the story and figure shit out.
What else was going on for you?
Just a lot of personal stuff, it was really just one thing after another, just really taking an axe to my very core, which is quite difficult sometimes because it makes you question everything that you thought you held as real or true from the beginning of your life. So that was fun, especially in lockdown. But no, I can't go into exact details. But it's just, I think everyone had their own battles, and it just intensified everything that was going on. And sometimes, I think, it became so easy to just go away and do other things, that it was certain things I know I hadn't dealt with, since even things like the recession in 2008 when I graduated, and I didn't really ever manage to get a job in my field. Well, I did actually, but then I quit to release the album, which was a very hard choice. And I never really dealt with the stuff that I went through, as a graduate going into the recession and basically having your dreams shattered. And so then I became a musician, just ran away and ran around the world. Even things like that, it was just like everything was coming back to collect its dues, and there was no escape.
Do you get the sense, though, that in a certain respect, the frequency that you were moving around, both in terms of obviously touring, which is part of the job, but then also just, living on different continents, that was a way of actively avoiding reality?
No, not necessarily. I think, to some extent it was, but at the same time, I was also doing constructive things along the way. I'm not someone that doesn't necessarily drink that much. I don't do drugs really, you know what I mean? So I'm not someone that uses escape. I do deal with my stuff, but you know, I use touring as a way to understand the world and to facilitate understanding between different people, you know, whether it's going to Mexico and understanding that. When I was first going to Mexico, it wasn't as common as it is now. You know, I felt like in the last few years more and more people going there. But when I was first there, I know a lot of people were saying, like, why are you going to Mexico? You know, what are you doing there? And they were quite scared by the reported dangers of it, you know, similar to when I was in Iran. A lot of people were like, why are you going there? You're going to die. And I think it's really important, you know, as a musician to go to these different places and actually facilitate communication between different cultures, you know, and sort of facilitate understanding and break down boundaries, barriers, whatever. So, you know, I love that about it. And I think as a musician, it isn't really so much about you. You know, you're kind of a vehicle, whether you're dealing with your own stuff or not. It can be very important because a lot of people can identify with something that you're going through, you know, but that was somehow just not where I was at.
It's a very interesting way of putting it, taking an axe to your core, you know, especially since I guess I assume generally on hearing a phrase like that, that, you know, that there may be some moving involved, or, you know, or getting up and starting over and trying something new somewhere else. But in this case, you were forced to do so without moving. You were forced to sort of like maybe confront that reality in a way that you hadn't been able to, or whether consciously or unconsciously were avoiding in the past.
Yeah, and I think one of the hardest things was also that I had to do it completely by myself. You know, normally when you're going through a bad time, you call on friends, you go over to see your family, whatever. And there was no way to do that. So I was really just like isolated going through this stuff. And I think that's why, in a way, you know, it was so important to do this album because, you know, I think it is so important. Like, communication is so important in this world. It's important not only between different nations, but also just generally between people, between different generations. And it's this thing, you know, with the album, it's a lot about we're going through this together, you know, different themes, because there were just a lot of themes going on last year. It wasn't just one, it was like just so many things, you know. There were and I don't know. So
You had said that you had been putting it off and that you were finally able to do the record. How long of a process was this, and how long had you been putting it off? And I guess, why had you been putting it off?
it was definitely a conscious thing to put it off. I think I wasn't really. There are a number of things. Firstly, I didn't really feel like I had something to say. You know, like I did have a lot of things to say, but I couldn't quite. I didn't have clarity on what it was, and I still felt like I needed to learn a lot. So I ended up doing a lot of collaborations, and I only ever did collaborations where I could really learn something, and I love that because, you know, I didn't go to music school. I learned theory when I was like a kid. You know, that was about it, and so collaborations was a cool way to learn. You know, from Shackleton, I learned a lot about beats and about working with the clock. And with Tricky, I learned a lot about not being too possessive about your words or too sensitive about words, you know, whatever. And with Jeff, I learned a lot about how to use reverb and echo and how to produce the snare drum. And I don't know, from the guy from Noi, he taught me a bit about pedals, and I was using like loop stations and things with him. And, you know, I had like pretty cool lecturers in my own made creation of university on tour. So, and the same with Exploded View. I mean, Exploded View taught me a lot about how to be a band and how to actually talk to each other, and how, when you're making music, how to communicate with one another. And that was a learning curve, I think, for all of us.
Obviously, there's a sense in which this record is collaborative. I mean, you know, you do have a band, you are working with others, but it sounds like it's still a very different process.
No, there wasn't a band actually. I wrote it by myself. I was sitting at home, and then luckily, and then I was sat there with these weird demos that I knew where they were going, but I needed kind of help to get them to where I needed them to be or wanted them to be. So that was when I called up the guy, my good friend Martin from Exploded View. I think first I sent them to Jeff, and just to be like, you know, what do you reckon? And Jeff was like, I don't really get it, but cool. And then and then I phoned up Martin, and Martin gets me a bit more. So I was like, what do you reckon? And he said, oh yeah, cool. I'd be up for co-producing it with you because I don't really have that much gear anymore. I had a bit at some point, but I sold it and stuff. So I just kept working on the things, and I rented a studio that had all the stuff that I knew I wanted to use. So I went in there and just started writing. And then Martin came and played the drums live because I just made beats on with electronic drums. So he did them live, and then we cut up the tracks together and just rearranged some things. And he has way better sounds on his computer than I do, so we did a lot of that, but then also just did a couple of overdubs. So it was actually a very different process, and trying to adapt it for live is a right headache. Because with Beak and the Anika project, it was like we were all in one room, we were playing instruments at the same time. I think we overdubbed maybe a drum machine or maybe the piano on I Go to Sleep or something, and that was it. So I mean, actually, theoretically, or really, I think there were no overdubs if I believe the press statement, and I think there really weren't. I don't even know. Maybe Stu was in the other room doing the drum machine or something. But it was way easier to figure out for live. But this one, it's like, oh wow, there's so many things going on. And it doesn't really make sense, like a lot of the things, especially to a musically trained person. They're like, what is this? Even the drummer I've now, because I've put together a band in Berlin for the live show, and the drummers just say, who wrote the drums? Because they're really weird. And I was like, well, yeah, that was me, So, I mean, obviously, I definitely don't want to take credit away from Martin because he obviously actually took them beyond just loops, which is what I started with, and did this crazy whatever magic with them, but they are very strange, like it's a mix of influences from drum and bass and jungle to whatever.
Is that a concerted effort to make them strange?
No, it's just the way I go. I've got terrible timing, I've got like two left hands and I don't know, and one track brain, so it's very confusing. So I just I'm not trying to be, it's just what they are, I just write in a different way, and it usually makes sense. And I did some more, because actually before Corona, the idea was always to write the album that year. So I took off the November until March in 2019. And in that time, I did a little bit more. I learned a bit. I did a mini music course about arrangement because I wanted to push myself a bit further so that I could do all of it, And so I was trying to do that, but I don't know. And then Corona happened, so then I just carried on. But I threw away all the stuff I wrote before. I had a load of demos in sort of March that year, and it was, with Corona and everything that was going on, I was like, this is so not relevant anymore. There's a whole load of other stuff I want to say. And I booked like 5 days in the studio and just brought my box of diaries and just freestyled over some beats that I made and started playing piano and weird synths and stuff.
I heard you describe the process of moving, and that in order to sort of be flexible with your geography, you really do have to get rid of a lot of your belongings. And I wonder if there's a way in which, at least metaphorically, that is similar to the process of essentially scrapping a bunch of demos and starting over again.
No, I think it's a bit different, actually. I mean, I think because I did live out of a suitcase for a good 10 years or something. Not actually out of a suitcase, but I was just, I would move a lot around, and the only way I could really afford to do it was so if I went to Mexico for 3 months, then I would just move out of my place in Berlin and put my stuff, a few things I had in my friend's basement, and then I would live in Mexico and find ways to get shows to pay my flights and stuff so that I could just do what I wanted to do, do the projects I wanted to do. And I always found a way to juggle the costs and make sure it happened, because it's not that easy to just go to Mexico and start a band. You kind of need quite a few, you need guts, and you need to find a way to bankroll it, and I don't have any money, and the first album didn't really make any money. So I just sort of became this weird nomad, just going around finding, and people often said, like, I don't get your touring schedule, like, why are you going there and then there? And I was like, well, I just want to go to these places, it was a way of just going and exploring the world, and just I did a solo show that was with a lot of very just unreleased stuff or versions of the tracks completely different. And it was, I don't know, it was just a way to get around, and it wasn't following the normal structure of music of like, the Spotify, oh, you need to release 3 albums a year, otherwise you're not relevant. I don't know, it was just sort of an anti form. It was this encouraging interaction because the shows would be a bit odd and a bit confrontational. And now the album's different. Obviously, I've gone through the usual motions with this album and got a press team and labels behind it, and that was a conscious choice because I wanted to just give it a bit of the best chances of survival, just to see, just out of for whatever reason. But yeah, there's different ways. It's music is a journey. It's not about just dishing out whatever stuff. I'm not a restaurant. It's more about just figuring stuff out and figuring out the world and finding out and kind of sharing your findings and being like, yeah, this is where I'm at. What do you reckon? Kind of, I don't know. It's weird.
The parallel that I see between the two is not being too precious about something and being able to let go.
I know what you mean. Yeah, I think because with things, at least I know with synthesizers. When I did at one point, I had a few, and I had quite a nice little studio in Berlin. And then I was given a month or 2 months notice to move out because this was a time in Berlin where suddenly the property was going through the roof and everyone was being kicked out of everywhere. But I was due to go to Mexico next week, so I was like, oh, I'm going to go to Mexico for 3 months. What am I going to do with all my stuff? And I ended up just selling it at decent rates to local bands because I'm like, I just want this stuff to be used, And I think, and this was often the way with many of my possessions. I'm not that possessive, I'm like, okay, I want to give it, thanks for being in my possession for a little while and everything you gave me, and now I give it to someone else, And with in terms of songs, when I throw songs away, I'm not like, it still went into the bank and it got you to the place of doing the next thing, So in a way there is a similarity, but it's also different in that they often say you need to get through 100 rubbish ideas to get to the good one. So if it's a bad idea, I'm like, oh, that's just another one of the 100 bad ones that I need to do before I get to the good one. And sometimes you hit the good one first. Sometimes it takes a lot of rubbish.
Were these necessarily rubbish ideas, or it sounds more like circumstance that they just weren't, as you had put it before, that they weren't relevant for the moment?
Yeah, they weren't very good. A lot of them weren't very good, I think it was just, it was more like I said, it got me to the place I wanted in the end, but it was just like, oh, okay. And if I hadn't done those, then I would never have got to the end. And even now when I'm learning the songs, I'm like, I don't even know how I got here. Like, how did I even write this? I don't remember. I don't even remember what notes I've played. And I have no idea how did I do all these things at once? I don't know. It's very strange. But, so you need the bad ideas too. And who knows when you actually get to the good idea. Like I say, I sent it to Jeff and he was like, yeah, I don't really get it. So you still have to you have to know in yourself when it's done. That's the hard thing with all of these sort of things. It's like, is it finished? It's like with artists, they never know when. It's knowing when to stop. That's hard.
It sounded, though, that you had really made a deal with yourself that you weren't going to get out of the year without producing an album.
Yeah, in a way, but actually not. Like I was sort of flirting with the idea of quitting also in 2019. But then when all this stuff went down, like I said, music was the only thing that was keeping me going. And I was so concentrated on it because it was the only way to get through the stuff I was going through. So it became necessity, and that's in the end so it became true in itself. Yeah, which is strange.
It's not the first time you had considered quitting music.
No.
It seems to be a bit of a theme.
I know. Every time I try and quit, something happens, and then I just end up, making an album, which is kind of like maybe, and it's not on purpose. I really was going to quit again in 2019 because I had a bit of a few things happened where it was like, oh, are you sure this is the good idea? And I thought, oh, maybe I need to sort out my life. There are a few people around me that were like, oh, maybe you should grow up and stop being such a child and stop being a musician. And sadly, I listened to them only for a while, luckily. And then I realized they were just, idiots, all of them. No, that's not true. But you know what I mean. There's always going to be people around you saying that you need to grow up.
It comes from a place of concern generally, I assume.
Yeah, and some of them, yeah. Other ones not. I think other ones can be all sorts. And in the end, I don't know. I came into the realization that some people were just not very nice. That's just which is odd because I don't really understand that always. Like actually wanting to do someone or something harm. I can't, it's something I don't really relate to. I'm not going to like pull the wings off a butterfly or something just for fun. And some people do this. And some people do this to other people too. And I don't know why and I don't know what they get from it. But that was one thing that I learned last year was that these people exist and you can't always understand them or why. And I don't know. It's just the way it goes. But it's usually best to try and avoid them and not have them in your life. And if they happen to be in power, then try and vote as much as you can for the other people.
I mean, certainly you can't base important life decisions on the feedback that they're giving you.
Yeah, well, it depends. That person might be extremely. If depends on the situation, Of course, these people can be extremely manipulative, and this, like I said, this can be in positions of power often as well. And this is when, yeah, it is important to really you have to trust yourself, and you have to learn to trust yourself. And that was one thing I really had to learn in that year. It was a lot about like. Not listening to all the other rubbish that's going on. And I think especially in this the political climate right now where there's so many narratives going on, and a lot of them are rubbish. It's fear narratives. And how do how do you somehow snap out of that and realize that it's a fear narrative and that it's not actually logical and that it's just trying to make you scared so that you do something. So yeah, so that was interesting actually. And it just, it was happening on the minor scale and on the mass scale. But that's life. It's full of its own lessons and it brings them whenever it wants. You can't always choose.
Oftentimes I found in my own life that it all tends to happen at the same time too.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, often also the good things can happen all at once. And it's like, oh, why can't you just stagger it, so I can actually enjoy each one? Like, why be. But there used to be this bus in Berlin that I used to take sometimes, and it always was the way. It wouldn't show for like an hour, and then like four would come at once, and it's like, okay, I know this is the old saying of like buses, but this bus, it was really true, and it was so frustrating. So that's how life is sometimes.
In this particular case, the impulse to quit, it sounds like, was primarily coming from external sources. In the other instances, has that generally been the case as well?
Yeah, actually, I mean, the reason I wanted to quit wasn't from these people, even though they were around me trying to say that and trying to make me feel guilty about doing what I did, which actually was really silly because they just didn't want me to leave them. But that's a whole nother matter. But no, the thing was more. It was really getting to my health, like physical health. Like I had a bit of a just because when you're carrying all this stuff all the time and so it was more that I was like, oh, maybe I should sort of chill out a little bit and get a different job because it takes its toll after a while. And I thought, okay, I've done it 12 years or whatever it is, maybe it's time. And I thought, oh, maybe I should try and do that normal life thing. But then I realized that would just be a really bad idea because I'd just be lying to myself and everyone else if I tried to pretend like nothing had happened before. I don't know, like, it just would be weird. So, and I only realized that after a while. So sometimes you just have to go through these things. It's trial and improvement life, figuring stuff out.
I think something a lot of people realize too when they do back away from it is how much of their, for better or for worse, how much of their identity is tied to this thing that they've been doing for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely identity in a way, but I think that's not really what was getting to me. I think it was more the fact that I wasn't allowed to play in normal life. You know what I mean? Like being part of being a musician is you have to be playful and you have room to explore and you don't need to have knowns, whereas in sort of normal life. It's sort of living within this accepted norms that actually are total rubbish. You know what I mean? Like I could never buy it even when I was a teenager at school, and I was like, no, I don't. Okay, I get your theory, and I get the fact that you say it's true, but it is actually only a theory or a hypothesis, and I don't really, doesn't really sound with me. I get it, but there's a lot of that in society or in the world. It's there are accepted meanings for things, and it's like, okay, this is the way we do that, and that's the way we do that. And I think when you've traveled a lot as well, you see that there really are very different ways of doing stuff everywhere, and that this whole thing about, oh, you need to do things like that, it's sort of a bit rubbish. And I don't want to just sort of walk around playing in this weird little doll's house of someone else. You know what I mean? I'd rather actually just be sometimes naive and stupid and do things differently and maybe put the wrong ingredient in my cooking. I don't care, whatever. You know what I mean? I don't want to be told by someone else, oh, no, you can't do that. So maybe I am just a big child, but maybe I just don't really want to. Maybe, but I think it's healthy. Why do you want to just go along with this? I mean, I really value inherited knowledge. I think we all do, probably. That's why we wear clothes and hats and things. But at the same time, there's room to still grow. It doesn't mean that, okay, now that's it. And I feel like generally in the West or in most civilizations, I mean, call them civilizations, but I don't think they're very civilized most of the time. There's a thing where once you've graduated, you don't need to learn anymore. I mean, yeah, maybe you need to do another certificate for your job or something, but you're not allowed to be playful anymore. And it's almost like you're shamed if your behavior is a bit you're being a bit childlike. Well, that's a bit of a shame, isn't it? It means you're not allowed to ever say that you don't know the answer evermore. You have to now always say, oh no, I know the answer, it's this is how you should do it, whatever. No, what, so it makes me vulnerable to say I don't actually know. And I think that's the nice thing about music is you can explore a lot, and it gives you space to do that, and you meet other people and you go on little trips together and you figure it out. And you don't always know where you're going at the beginning, and you suddenly get somewhere and it's like, oh wow, like that was cool. Didn't really expect that.
Is there a sense in which playing music is childlike, or is kind of avoiding growing up, just the act of wanting to do that and doing that for a living?
Well, that's the thing. It depends on what you mean by childlike. If you're saying in a derogatory way, or if you're saying it in what is childlike anyway? I mean, childhood is a socially constructed category in some ways.
I'm asking specifically in terms of dealing with other people's perceptions of what you do. Do you get the sense that their feeling about wanting to be a professional musician is a way of prolonging that and sort of pushing off the inevitable adulthood?
Well, I mean, not necessarily, because what is adulthood anyway? I think it's all subjective. It depends who you are, who you're asking. In England, having your own house is seen as a means, a signifier of success and things. And then, recently I was in this conversation with a Berlin Antifa, and she was like, no, you should never get your own house. You're giving the money to the whatever, the mega corporations that are buying all the houses up in Berlin. And it's like, yeah, of course, it's subjective. Everyone's got an opinion, and in terms of growing up or whatever. I think music, what about people that design T-shirts, the swirly patterns on T-shirts? Like, they need to be a bit creative, and then some boring Barry from whatever might wear that T-shirt, and it's obviously served its function. And I think in the end, in this world, everyone serves a different function. We can't always do the same. I remember when I was a journalist and my editor used to say, I'm very happy that you're working here, Anika, but I also am very happy that not everyone's like you, because I think I'd go crazy. So, and it's just like, I think different people play different roles. And even in the band, you need the people that just play the stuff, and you need the other ones that might just add a little bit more something to it. I think it's across the board like that, and it's not like one is better than the other. yeah, everyone plays a role, you know. But I do enjoy the fact that music affords me this freedom, and that I don't need to pretend as much. Like when I was growing up, I felt like I had to pretend a lot, to pretend to be someone I wasn't. Whereas music, you don't really need to pretend. You just do what you want. It's okay most of the time. I mean, it depends. But I don't need to pretend to have the answer. That's nice.
When you were working as a journalist and your editor said that to you, that if there were more of you, or that if everyone was like you, that he or she would go crazy, what are those qualities you think that they were seeing in you that were, I guess, so different from your peers?
I think it was more that I just used to question everything he said, and I didn't do it in a way to be annoying or, you know, I just was. It was more to understand, you know, to understand what he wanted me to do or whatever. And he said, yeah, you know, the other people they just say, yeah, okay, and then they go do the job. But with you, you're always saying, yeah, but what about that or what about that? And maybe, you know, I think that's definitely that's why I always wanted to be a documentary journalist or a, I like to question things. I think it's important because so often we don't question things, and it's like, you know, I remember being fascinated by the normal curve when I learned psychology as a, I don't know, like when I was 16 or something, and just generally about this thing of like norms, you know, accepted norms and what, and the fact that actually it's firstly it's very and you see this in race and misogyny kind trials. One thing is acceptable in one era and in another era it's not, and this is often guided by these norms, you know, this norm curve. The same in you know, and I think growing up half German half English, and going to school in England and where they said all the Germans were evil, and I didn't, and I, you know, I have German family, and I was like, oh no, this doesn't quite seem right. You know, it's not as simple as black and white kind of thing. So then I would talk to my German relatives about these things, and one of the things that they, with my grandmother, used to dwell on. I mean, she didn't really overtly tell me this, but I got it through my mother. You know, about a lot of the bad stuff that happened in Germany. And but my grandparents, at least my grandmother, used to always just say, "Yeah, but we didn't know. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know what was going on." You know, specifically in relation to concentration camps and what was going on there. And I think growing up with this, it was somehow shows how important it is to question things, question what's really going on, you know, and say, oh, actually I don't, or when you feel like there's something happening that you don't think's okay, is I think it's important to stand up and say, no, I don't think that's okay. You know, even if you're in a room and everyone's like, what do you mean you don't think that's okay? Because I'm sure that's what would have happened back then. You know, imagine being the one that's like, oh, actually I don't think this is quite right. You know, you'd probably be shot. You know, I think it's important. You have to be the one that says, oh, actually I don't think this is quite okay.
Is that what drew you to journalism in the first place?
Yeah, realizing that stories don't have the good and the evil. You know, it's not as easy as this Disney-fied version, and that politics and history are complex. You know, you can see that now in England, and England is still going on about winning the war in football, and then yet they're extremely racist in you know, a lot of these really hardcore English football fans that are like, "We won the war, we won the war," and then they start shouting racist chants at half the football players, and you think, yeah, but why are you happy that you won the war? Well, because you know, if you actually look at, you know, what actually it's seen as a victory over racism, it's seen as a victory over these certain things, and yet you're totally hypocritical because you're just being racist against a different group of people. And you know, I think there's so much hypocrisy in these narratives, and yeah, I think it, and that was one thing that was really important, you know, or one of the things I wanted to do with music, like I said before, you know, was travel as much as I can and break down these stereotypes and break down these monolithic entities of good and evil and civilized and not civilized and whatever, you know, because it's all rubbish in the end. I remember coming back from Iran, and in Iran, the you know, a lot of the women I met were extremely well dressed and like with perfect makeup, perfect nails, you know, extremely like done up. And when I came back from Iran from this residency, someone, I think they meant it as a joke, but it was the most sort of like poor joke ever, where they said, "Oh yeah, welcome back to civilization," you know. And I looked around, I was at Berlin airport, and there were these two German women, like punching each other because one had stolen the other one's suitcase by accident. And then I saw these Iranian women like standing around all like gasping at this scene. And I was like, yeah, welcome back to civilization. Of course, that's where I am now. So, I think it's important to, and that's why I love music, because it does give you the chance to try and, like facilitate conversation between different people. And I've played in Russia, and that was really interesting. Had some great conversations with people after the show. I don't know. Yeah, I played in Japan. One of the shows was cool. The other one was a bit weird. But yeah, it's cool. It's a nice way to do it. And if you can, sometimes people are moved by it. Maybe they might go do something. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's important.
It sounds like at least the early stages of the process of putting this record together were solitary in a way that, maybe music making hasn't been for you in some time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, that was a lot about just I didn't really, I think that's why I really had to do that course at the beginning of the year, because I just didn't have enough faith in myself to do it, and so I knew, that's why I kind of set myself up with this course, because I knew what I was lacking. I was sort of lacking the seeing it finished, you know what I mean? And I remember once, even a few years ago, I learned how to drive in Berlin, because I was struggling to do this thing where to see something go from like not knowing how to do something to knowing how to do it, and when you're out of education for a while, it can just be this strange thing, because you have to be bad at it for a while, which is hard. You have to sit there and be like, oh, okay, but you have to trust yourself that if you just keep at it, it will get good. Which as you get older does become harder, I think. So so that kind of gave me the guts to just write. And so in the beginning of the solitary process, I used to just every day I would try and write a song, whether it was good or not. I didn't care. I just wanted to finish it, and that was good. But yeah, I think everyone has to find their own process, which it seems like a really trivial thing probably for everyone that went to music school, because they learned that, but I didn't. I learned how to write and stuff, different things.
I speak to a lot of musicians, and I'm a writer myself. And obviously, anything that's remotely creative, everybody's process tends to vary quite a bit. But I do find that more often than not, sometimes in the cases where people suggest this isn't true, they might be trying to make the process sound more romantic than it is. But the vast majority of people I speak to who write music, it has to be a very deliberate process to, right down to actually almost creating office hours for themselves and pretending like they're going into an office and, sitting down and wood shopping, as they call it.
But the weird thing is, that is, but then some of the songs, like I end up, the actual ones I wrote in a very random, sporadic nature. So I did all this office hours stuff, but that was to get the bad ideas out. I needed to learn the discipline, and then suddenly, two of the tracks, Freedom and Finger Pies off the album, I wrote those in my studio just one night, and I just went in, on different days, but I remember I just went in and I was just trying to escape a certain situation in my house. So I just went in and was like, and just let loose and went wild, and then ended up with these two weird tracks. So it definitely wasn't on purpose. And the same with going into the studio. I sort of set up this framework. So I went into the studio with some drum loops and chord progressions as a starting point, and then went crazy with the lyrics and just totally let out all this stuff. But it was only possible because I'd been writing all this other stuff the days before, so I got used to the routine of it, and then I could go wild. It's always the way they say with many things, you learn it really tight somehow, and then you can start to kind of loosen up with it. It's the same with bands, when you're rehearsing, you should learn it, to be really perfect first, and then you can start to mess with it a bit.
That's the process they describe for painting, right? Is you need to learn all the rules and you need to become technically good at it, and then you can start painting outside of the lines.
But I mean, it really depends on the situation. I think this with when you're writing alone, it's a lot more discipline in that way, because you have to do, you have to go back to it in different roles. Whereas, when I wrote with Exploded View, we really did it just, it was all live, and same with Beak, even, and even with the tricky thing, we did it all live because I had stuff to bounce against. But when you're writing alone, you have to sort of go into the studio with one hat on and then go back in with a different one, and different roles. You can be more free, like with my lyrics, I'm always very free. Like I never really consciously write lyrics, they just come from a weird dark place. But when maybe if I'm doing drums, I'll be a bit more mathematical about it. It depends, not always. Sometimes I do some weird beat and then try and make it make sense and improve the timing a little bit. But yeah, it depends. It really.
The first solo record leaned a lot more heavily on covers. You do have writing credits on some of the songs. Were you just not ready to write at that point in your career in life?
Well, we never. The intention was never to be a musician or release an album. So there was no. It was like going to the cinema. You know what I mean? I didn't really have an intention, and they didn't really either. I mean, I only realized after they were actually looking for a singer for Beak, but I didn't really get that. I was sort of I'd been working in a different part of the music scene. I wasn't a musician. I wasn't ever in bands. I secretly in my own home played guitar and wrote lyrics as a way to just get all the stuff out of my head that I didn't understand. And then and yeah, I was more a facilitator, observer. I did. I was a journalist, I was a booker, I set up a mini label, I was managing bands. And then I quit that because it was just killing my soul, and I didn't sleep for about a year and a half. And then I, by accident, got a call about, I don't know, singing on some, and I just didn't have anything to do, and I didn't really have anywhere to live. So when someone said, "Oh yeah, just come to Bristol and you can hang out with us," and I was like, "All right." I just wanted some people to hang out with, maybe. I don't know. It was definitely not, I wasn't like, oh yeah, let's go write an album. None of us were. And we didn't even think about it. It was only quite a while after, when I was in Berlin, and I'd finally got a job in journalism after a year of being, in a bad place. And that was when Jeff called me up saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, I was listening through to those songs we recorded, and I realised we've got sort of like 8. So if I did a remix, it's about 9. So it could be an album. Like we could release it." And I was like, "Oh, didn't really want to. I've just got a job in what I want to do. Don't mess it up now," sort of thing. But then I was like, "Oh, you know what? Yeah, maybe. Like it sounds kind of cool." And he said, "Well, you could borrow Beak as a live band, and then just do what you want with it." And so I was like, "Okay." And then he was like, "Yeah, on the condition you always have to pay everyone, and you have to make sure you have a sound tech always, and a person to carry the stuff, because Beak won't carry the stuff." But of course, they did as well. But so he was like, "All right, so you can have all this and maybe borrow some of my connections, but you have to figure out how to pay for it all. Here we go." So I was like, "Okay." So I took the challenge, and then it was kind of interesting.
At a certain point, when people are clearly responding positively to it and you're getting all these opportunities to play in interesting places and play with great bands, it must feel like you're on the right path to some degree.
Well, the thing is, yeah, at the beginning it was weird. I didn't really know. I didn't really know what was going on, and I didn't really want to be honest. Like, I had mega stage fright. Like I've never been in school plays or anything. I was so shy; it was just impossible. So, so it was a bit weird at the beginning, and it wasn't so easy because there was a lot of abuse. But that was why we recorded it anyway. At the beginning, I wanted to do an anti-album because I was really annoyed at a lot of the stuff in the music industry. And when I first met Jeff, we were just, we had similar qualms, and so we just wanted to make something that was almost, it was hard to sync, because it was all recorded in one room and there weren't stems. And it was sort of like this weird voice that was hidden in the back under these layers, and the drums and bass were really far out in the front. And it was sort of produced and recorded in this this very obtuse way, like and then yeah, of course the hip hop heads hated it, especially because we released it on Stone's Throw. So the first video got so much abuse, and I think it had at the beginning it had so many dislikes. It was about half half, like half likes, half dislikes, and they're like, oh, what is this rubbish sort of thing. And then slowly people sort of started to think it was all right, but it took a while. I mean, there was not, it wasn't like immediately popular. The weird thing with it is just been this constant burner. It's sort of for 10 years, and people discover it now and they think it just came out, and it's like, okay. So it's just you're playing a different game. It's like a weird thing, and yeah, it was surreal at the beginning playing some of these shows with a lot of people that I really admire, and it was very strange. And I was under a lot of stress, so I couldn't always enjoy the beginning parts. But then, I realized it was somehow a weird necessity that meant I could, continued it and whatever. But it's a weird thing. I don't really understand.
You can look back on those successes and see what you were able to achieve, but while you're actually going through it, it doesn't feel like a constant stream of successes.
No, it was sort of hell at the beginning. I had a really bad time at the start, and there would be these mega highlights where I would suddenly find myself in playing on the or sharing a dressing room with, like, I don't know, next to Nick Cave and PJ Harvey and like people I really admire, and having just this really amazing food, and being driven around, and then being in Paris and them giving you free clothes and everyone saying you're amazing. And then the van would drop me off at my bedsit in Bristol, and I realized I only had euros on me, and I ran out of change for the bloody electricity meter, and so I sat in the dark on my bed, and I didn't, and it was freezing, and in a tiny weird little room with the psycho next door that was a Britney Spears obsessed guy that would just play her DVDs on repeat. And obviously now we've got a different Britney Spears era right now. But before, going back to the previous times, but it was just like, wow, like the contrast between the situations of extreme luxury and being surrounded by all these people that are like, yeah, you're great. And then the next minute you're just stuck in the dark in a bedsit that smells moldy and it's freezing. And actually the beginning was really hard because I was surrounded by all these, with Beak, I was touring with them, and they all just thought, who is this person? Because I had no idea what I was doing or how to deal with the stress or going on the stage. I'd have like mini panic attacks like after each performance. It wasn't really easy. Whereas people that go to stage school, they're like, yes, this is the moment I've been waiting for. And of course, later on, like the Exploded View tour in 2018 was one of my favorite tours. And it was so nice to tour with friends and to tour with, and it took time to get there to actually be able to enjoy it as well.
Standing out there and performing in front of people is one of the more vulnerable things you can do, but so is writing an entire album and putting it out there. I mean, in a sense, are you kind of returning to that early vulnerability to some degree?
No, it's vulnerable in a different way. I mean, with the music, yeah, of course, it's vulnerable, and I don't mind putting it out. It's just like, all right, you can slate it if you want, but in the end, it's just, it's just where I'm at, sort of thing. But I don't know. It was just, yeah, it was just very different. At the beginning, it was difficult because I really was just sort of drowning in it all, and I didn't know what to do, and that's why I find it difficult when people, especially younger musicians, are like, oh, how did you get there? Or how did you get your record deal? Or like, what advice do you have? And I'm like, I just don't know. I never really wanted, it's not like I went to stage school and then was like, I really want to be a singer. That wasn't really my route. So I can't really advise on that, and and as you see with people like Britney Spears and this tragic story right now, it's not as easy as people think it is. And you need a lot of, and especially if you're surrounded by the wrong people, which is very often the case, especially if you're young and people are like, taking advantage, it can be horrendous. I was very lucky to, I mean, I'd actually been, like I said, before I went into music, I was working as a promoter, a journalist, a label person, managing bands. I had a reasonable idea about the music industry, I think more than a lot of people that are in it. But one thing I didn't know anything about was the bit about being a musician, and And I was lucky because Jeff surrounded me with a lot of very good people, and Jeff himself was, he's a good guy, and I'm very grateful to him and to Peanut Butter Wolf and to Beak and to all the people that they surrounded me with. It was good people. Um, I had to then fall on my face a few times when I was trying to put together my own group of good people, but that's the way it goes. But yeah, it's a difficult journey. I think you need a lot of guts to do it, and especially when it's DIY, because it's not like it was the 90s and there were major budgets and everyone was doing it for me. Like I was managing the project since the beginning, managing the budgets, the bands, often booking the tours. And it's like, yeah, you do need, and then you live off a shoestring alongside it, because if you're just breaking even the whole time, it's a little bit tricky. So it's like, yeah, you need to do this job if you want to do it in that way. Yeah, you need a lot of guts, and you need a lot of, you have to be a bit business savvy, even though you also can't be. So it's that finding that balance of being business savvy in the back, but then the music has to remain true to heart. And that was something that at the beginning I found really hard, because the music, like the performing on stage, was so emotional, and it would just like destroy me. And then people would try and talk to me after the show, and I just like rip their head off because I couldn't quickly put the gate up again to keep the tigers in. So that took a little bit of learning.
You had mentioned earlier that you're dealing with publicists and taking a sort of, I guess, more traditional route or traditional approach to putting this out into the world. And is that part of taking this more, I don't know, seriously is probably the wrong word because it implies you weren't serious before, but that you're, I guess, sort of approaching it more as a job, as a career in a way that maybe you hadn't previously?
Well, the thing is, previously, like I say, I'd worked in the scene in all the other ways apart from the music, being the musician thing. So before, my way to deal with it was to just try and put on my like business hat, because like it was the only way to protect myself in that situation. So I always did it seriously, because I'm not going to quit my job that I spent a year trying to get to do it. I always gave it I always took it seriously. But I think in the last years, I finally learned how to be a musician more, how to let go more, how to trust yourself, how to like all these skills that maybe other people have or maybe learn in. It's just different. It's an evolution. That's the longer you're in it, it's just, you get to know things, and yeah, it's a journey. Music is a journey. That's why it's I think sometimes when there was a girl recently wrote to me on, she's a music student somewhere, and she's 19, and she said some of her people around her were saying she's too old to do music. And I thought, what, you're 19? That's insane. Like, but it's this weird pressure at the moment where you need to have like 20 albums out by the time you're 20. And it's this quick, premature growth, forcing of things before you've even ripened. And I think sometimes it's good to take your time. I mean, that's why then a lot of young artists might work with older ones, or they might have management in the back to try and speed up the process. That's what music is a lot about, learning. And if you look at people like David Bowie or even the Beatles, like they went through a lot of different growing times, from the sort of clean cut Beatles to then the 70s hippies to sort of 80s, whatever
It sounds like it is a combination of, as you said, learning to trust yourself, but also learning to trust others and learning to give up certain aspects that maybe you might have micromanaged in the past.
I think it's more about learning how to trust. Like I always trusted people, but sometimes too much, like I put too much in their hands. And it was more, I think I had to learn how to be more selective. That was one thing, because often I try to see the good in many people, and actually you don't always have to do that. Like, of course, you don't, if you're doing certain things, you don't need to be selective. But if it's to do with your business, or who you're playing with, or it's okay to just say sometimes like, okay, this didn't work. So yeah, I don't know. It's just, yeah, it's a lot of it's just learning. But and I'm still only like, I don't know, 4% of the way. We see what happens next.